The Sustainable Voice, bringing you big successes from small places worldwide.
Hey Leigh, how's it going?
Hey, Ashish, it's going great. It's rainy around here today. April, well, now it's May, but anyway, we looking for some spring flowers.
Yeah, same here. Raining. I think it's the same storm. Amazing. We live, how many states apart, and it's raining here as well. So there's that too.
hmm
So how was Mother's Day? Because as of this recording, we just celebrated Mother's Day. How was Mother's Day?
It was fabulous. To be totally honest, I love my children. I love my husband. I love my whole family, but none of them were around. And I went to an art festival with a couple of my mama girlfriends who were also without kids. It might have been one of the best Mother's Days ever because I didn't have to lift a finger for anybody else. So it
Tell
was
them you
great.
said that. Hope they don't listen to this podcast.
Hope not. No, I love them. I heard from all of them, but it was a great day.
Well, I gotta say, I'm gonna toot my own horn because I gave you a pretty cool Mother's Day gift yesterday. I gave you a pretty cool Mother's Day gift. Those of you who are local where I live, and I'm not going to say it here, not that I'm afraid, but if anybody wants to show up at my door to disagree with me, I'll give you my address right now. But beyond that, there's a coffee joint that I go to. I'll give them a plug right now. It's called the Bunkhouse Coffee Bar, and the actual building is a World War II bunkhouse. Best organic coffee. It's a completely vegan place. I'm vegetarian for those of you that know. So everything's plant-based there, which I enjoy the way I eat. And, for those of you that ridicule me, go ahead and let the ridiculing begin. I got an answer for all of you. But the coffee is incredible. The owner roasts the coffee, brings it in from Idaho, roasts the coffee, and it doesn't burn it. There's a certain coffee chain that rhymes with trucks that just has a habit of burning their coffee beans. Something, I think it's called Bar Trucks is what it's called. Or rhymes with that rather. But they burn their coffee beans. This place is incredible. So there was this lovely young lady there who, by the way, is a listener, which I have to give a short plug here as well, because we just added the most amount of listeners this last month out of any month we've been doing this podcast. So we set a new record. So that's fantastic. So she is listening. And the first episode she came across was the Strong Women, Powerful Women. And it was the episode about you. The one that we had those smart aleck comments showing up that our social media guys were so good at responding to. So that was her first episode, and she was intrigued. So we then arranged a really cool Mother's Day gift for you. Why don't you go ahead and tell the audience exactly what happened?
Well, that was so cute. You sent me a video. She recorded a little Mother's Day greeting for me, your barista, and that was just the sweetest ever. That was so unexpected and a nice surprise.
Well, and she is a smart cookie, right? I think she's 21 or 20 or something like that. She has aspirations to be a pilot, to be a commercial airline pilot. And when I told her about your time at the Coast Guard, her eyes lit up.
Aw.
So for any of the naysayers who were talking about that episode saying, oh, you guys are too woke, this wasn't about woke. We just inspired a 21-year-old coffee barista to follow her dreams to be a pilot because she heard your story. So
yeah,
take that.
That's great. That's great. That was one of my those are the kind of little moments, we always talk about small things having a big effect. And it was a nice surprise to hear that from her. I heard from a few other young people who have crossed my path because of my kids yesterday. And it's nice when you don't realize the impact you have on people. So
That's right.
It was special.
And it ties into today's topic, because we're talking today about the Ivory Tower. Anybody who's worked in corporate America, even bureaucracy, whether it's government level, whether it's private level, corporate level, whatever the case is, bureaucracy is everywhere. And one of the things that comes up is the Ivory Tower. You've got people and I call them the dumbest smart guys in the world. They make decisions, he or she, they make decisions in these ivory towers in this vacuum with blinders on. And these decisions, you kind of look back and just go, and you stop. I mean, I was reading an article this morning about the demise of Nissan Motors, and the trouble. They basically, for those of you who don't know, they've basically got 12 months left to live if they don't get a cash infusion and somebody buying them. So the former CEO, his name is Carlos Ghosn. He was Leigh killer. He was the one that saved Nissan in the early days. And he came out, and a lot of us were looking saying, we kind of saw this writing on the wall for a while based on the type of stuff they're building. But you have people in Ivory Tower making decisions they thought was just fantastic without any kind of understanding of what's happening on the ground. But it's not just corporate America. It applies to the government. It applies to other parts. We're going to do a second part where actually we're going to be talking about the Pope as well, and the papacy in terms of how it applies there. And this is not a religious freedom podcast. So any of you guys who are about to jump on me and crucify me and whatnot, bring it. We're not even talking about that. So we're actually talking about something much more intellectual than getting into a holy war. There's enough of that happening in the world. So we were talking specifically about this, and I bring it back to your daughters. You have a daughter in the armed forces.
Mm-hmm.
You were in the Coast Guard. When you were in the Coast Guard, was your family around? Was there family around you while you were serving in the Coast Guard?
No, they were East Coast, I was West Coast. So I was, I was out by myself.
But they knew you were serving.
Yeah, they knew I was serving.
Did you ever talk to them about decisions made during your tenure? Not specifically about the Coast Guard. I'm not trying to knock anybody, get anybody in trouble. But did you ever have conversations with your family about questionable decisions, or them talking to people who were Monday morning quarterbacking situations without fully understanding what it meant to have a child serving? Did that ever come up in conversations?
No, nothing like that ever came up in conversations. I just didn't have that kind of relationship with them. But as I reflect back now on, the decisions I made at that age and the things that were put in front of me, decisions that were forced on me, through my job, I often quarterback myself, and can say, oh, wow, this is interesting. Now I understand why I made that decision. Or if I'm beating myself up about something that I did or said, or, some way I offended someone, or, didn't have the outcome I wanted, I'm able to give myself a lot more grace, and say, you did the best you could with what information you had at the time.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Yeah. That makes sense. Okay, so while you were serving, not to question your superiors, but did you ever get the feeling that people didn't quite understand what the front line was like, or what you were actually facing with some of the decisions they made?
For sure. I had both extremes. I had one commanding officer who was so in touch and so incredible. He's the guy I've told you about that I with Patrick, still keep in touch with him. And then the person who came in after him, I will not say his name. He was so out of touch. He was just the worst. And yeah, we would have to do things like, after he went home, at the end of the day, make sure there were no flies in his office.
Nice.
Like that was one of the standing orders at night. You had to go into his office, and if there were any flies, they had to be killed.
Well, that made no sense.
And that's that's like the ultimate of ridiculousness. But there was everyday stuff that the man was just so out of touch. It was really bad, really bad.
And that's a shame. And I had that, you see it in the corporate world all the time. I lived through that for a few years in the corporate world where I worked for a company. I won't say the company's name, but those of you who know me know the company. The company was great, but the CEO of the company, who was one of the richest men in the world at the time, out of touch completely. Mm-hmm. Not on purpose, by design. I had 3 separate directors accused of sexual harassment. All 3 of them were guilty. One in particular, I'll never forget. I was taking the board exams with this young lady that was working in wealth management, and she was very smart, and we both passed our boards together, and we were working in the same department. Well, the company had layoffs, and they went through 3 rounds. The first round they told us about. The second round we read in the newspaper. The third round we still heard about on TV. And she was laid off, which, look, a company has the right to do that. However, about a month after that, not even a month, I'd say probably 2 weeks after that, while she was discussing her severance, she was talking to the supervisor, her superior, or her superior, about transferring to a different department in a company that this large corporation just bought. Something going back and basically asking for a transfer, throw me a bone since you laid me off. I'm not asking anything else. This person who's married with 3 children basically tells her, oh, sure, come and have drinks with me and we'll talk about it. Has drinks and summarily while they're having drinks. And she was very attractive and whatnot, and but that has nothing to do with it. Summarily asks her to run away with him to Hawaii and to stay in Hawaii with him, even though he's married with 3 children. And that takes a special type of person to have the call to do that, first of all. And it's, for me, self-worth is everything. And I spent a lot of time talking to her because her self-worth was crushed. She thought that's what it is. It's almost like her looks became a hindrance, and we've already talked about this, but it happened, right? And nobody stopped. Nobody stopped it, even though it was public knowledge it happened. I remember when I resigned, I wrote a letter to the CEO of the company. And I explained to him why I was resigning. And I gave 3 specific things. And I said to him, I said, I will not name the directors, but there are 3 directors who are accused of this. And I said, I know they've been accused of this because you're supposed to know about them. All 3 of them are guilty. He finally showed up a month after I left. I heard about it. I'm not saying that I was the catalyst, but I got a call from his second in command, which, I'm a peon, right? He got a call from the second in command asking for details. And then he showed up and all of a sudden those 3 directors were summarily let go. They were relieved of duties, as they should have been. But it took 2 years. Now you go back to some of the decisions that they were making. Again, in that Ivory Tower, it was corporate decisions that they were making. They were losing, I think this is the size of the company, they were losing $10 million a quarter. Right. So $10 million every single quarter they were losing. And I remember going to a town hall and this executive vice president is sitting in a room full of people who are making all sorts of incomes, people who make minimum wage to people who are there, none of whom make anywhere near what she makes. And look, that's fine. But then she starts talking about where she has her custom suits made. These are $4,000 business suits, $10,000 business suits. She starts talking about these suits. Out of context, fine. But then that was pretty much the poster child of the type of decisions they were making. That you could see, like, okay, they were making decisions in a vacuum. Not one of them knew what they're doing. And you know where I got my proof? September 11th. So when those attacks happened, half of the servers, I believe, were in one of those towers or something like that, where everybody went offline. So everything was suspended. The directors, one of whom was among those guilty 3, showed up and said, let's get you on all hands on deck. They didn't have the foggiest idea what to do. They didn't know how to do the job. They didn't know how to do anything else. And you could tell right away that they made a career out of celebrating mediocrity. Right. And you kind of have to chuckle. Right? Here's how I paint this picture. Right. You ever see Office Space, the movie?
I'm sorry, I have not. I need to see it. I have not seen it. I know.
I'm going to need you to come in on Sunday.
I know.
Yeah, I'm going to need you to watch this movie. I'm sending you a red stapler just so you know. Now, I mean, yeah. Okay, yeah. I had that guy. I had that boss. Not my boss. He was cool, but his boss. Coffee in hand every morning. So, what's happening? And I'd ask him a question. I'm not too sure about that. But if you ask this person, I think they'll be able to answer you. God, he made Stephen Wright look excited. And it was like, it's 5:30 in the morning, first of all, work, and this guy's putting you to sleep as he's saying this. And I watched Office Space. This is the epitome of bad decisions from corporate from an ivory tower. This is the epitome of that. And I think that's the thing. You fast forward to governments around the world, and I'll just briefly touch on the IMF and the World Bank, International Lending Organizations. We all know what's happening between Pakistan and India right now. And I'm not going to get into who's right, who's wrong in that. That's a separate conversation, and I'll keep my thoughts to myself on that, just because they're pretty my views are pretty polarizing on this. However, just a few days ago, and this is as of this recording, this is happening. A few days ago, the IMF restructured that debt. Restructured and allowed it to be restructured.
For who? Whose debt?
For Pakistan.
For Pakistan. Okay.
And I get why they did it, but there was no movement on either side to try to bring a peace deal, to use that to try to monetize some sort of peace between the two. Granted, that's not a new conflict. It's been happening for a while. But again, that same Ivory Tower allowed Argentina to default in their loans 9 times. That same Ivory Tower is asking Kenya to charge 5 million citizens out of 50 million to have them pay the lion's share and wanting to raise taxes 40%. Right? That same Ivory Tower. If we shift over to governments, I mean, I think governments making bad decisions around the world, it seems like they do that part by correctly. If they do get it right, it's by accident. Around the world. And it's not that anybody is right or wrong. This isn't about casting blame. It's about not having blinders on. So your daughter is in the Air Force. Do you ever get the feeling that other parents don't understand what it's like to have a child in the armed forces?
Yeah, I think there's some of that. I think there's probably some of that. And to be honest, I don't understand a lot of what is going on with her. It's really different than, especially at this training phase, which, by the way, she's getting her aviator wings this week. It's
nice.
So exciting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, a lot of processes. Sometimes I don't even understand. But I think probably more than that, what's interesting is she has friends who have had parents who have served in the Air Force as well. And it's interesting the pressure that they feel from their parents who've actually served before them in the same branch of the military. But yeah, I think there is some of that where their parents just don't get it.
Yeah. And then, like you said, you're questioning some of the things that's different for her as well. She's got a lot to process as well. You know, attention spans for children is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And the job for teachers is getting harder and harder and harder. Yet we could have seen this coming a mile away, that there's going to be a teaching shortage. We could have seen it coming a mile away. Between poor pay, between substandard conditions. I remember I talked to one particular, his wife was a teacher at a public school, and both my kids go to public school. It was right after the incident at Parkland. There was a law being passed around about teachers carrying guns. This isn't a debate about guns. So anybody who's watching, who's getting on your keyboard typing right now, just stop. This is not a Second Amendment conversation. The reason she left wasn't about her feeling on guns. The reason she left, and this is the Ivory Tower model, you had people trying to pass this law about teachers carry permits, right, to have weapons on them to help protect their children. And then there's a debate going back and forth about, well, should teachers carry guns? Shouldn't they carry guns? And she said, this is the wrong question. The question isn't that. The question is, what happens if something goes wrong? What happens if I misfire? What happens if I miss? What happens if I'm carrying this and the holster doesn't come out? What if this is an accident? She said, I'm not talking about the medical side. She goes, there's no legal precedent. So I could be personally responsible for accidentally, which goes, what if I miss and a child gets hurt? I could be personally responsible. She said, I have no faith in not just the school board. I have no faith in our system standing up for me if I'm being held personally liable to what happened to a child and you want me to carry. She said, but the debate isn't asking that question. These people who have either never been teachers or don't have kids in public school or don't face this or have never had any experience dealing with this are now making this a conversation about the Second Amendment and about whether or not teachers should carry guns and whatever the case and about every other thing there. And that's not, the debate isn't that. And so she left a promising career in education, an amazing teacher. She left a promising career in education simply because of the fact that she said the debate was all wrong. She goes, I don't want to be part of this debate. I'm going to be a pawn in this debate, and I'm going to be made an example of if something goes wrong. Now, mind you, she's also African-American as well. So she goes, that's also a separate side of this as well.
Yeah.
Right? It's what this is talking about is, and the gist of it, and I know this is not rocket science for you or anybody else, but I'm going to quote Chris Rock here. There's a movie that he made some years ago, and it was actually a really funny movie. And it was about him running for president. And he had a line in there in a debate. He goes, how can you make decisions about the poor when you've never been poor? How can you make decisions about guns when you've never been shot at?
Yeah.
And you laugh and you kind of like, I'd say he's Chris Rock. He's a comedian. He's not wrong.
He's not wrong. Which I have a question for you. As you were telling me this, I'm thinking, so my parents owned a small business and I worked in it starting at age 10. I was working in the business. Your parents, you are the child of entrepreneurs. Do you think when you look back on your time in corporate America, the people that, were so out of touch, I feel like as a child of a small business owner, I always, as an employee, really looked out for the best interest of the owner because I understood what it meant for their business to thrive and I understood my role in that. But I think some people who've not had that kind of experience, understanding that, the owner, the skin in the game that the owner really has, you're not as invested or, supportive of that. Do you think that you were like that as an employee? Do you feel that you were a better employee because of your background with your parents and their business?
Yeah, 100%. Look, at 17, I had told my parents I want nothing to do with this business.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be an engineer. I was designing cars in AutoCAD since I was 14. I'll tell you a funny story. I designed a car for Honda Motor Company, breaking down the molecules of H2O, having what's now called the crab crawl by GM, but basically taking the wheels going sideways to avoid accidents, the aerodynamic coefficient drag of 0.29, this, that, everything else. I was 11. I was 11 when I did that. And I sent my father, without telling me, sent this off to Honda Motor Company, and I got a letter back from the lawyers saying these are all really good ideas. Thank you very much. We can't use them. Now, I'm pretty sure they use some of them anyway.
That's funny. Yeah.
So I had a passion for cars. I've had since I was 5.
Yeah.
So I had gone to my parents at 17 and said, I don't. And I remember my father said to me, he said, that's great. I wasn't going to ask you anyway.
Yeah.
In corporate America. And it wasn't because I had to, because I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote my senior thesis, global healthcare reform, had nothing to do with travel. I wanted to focus on international economics. And I love finances. I love money. I love money numbers, not counting it. I mean, like being able to write policy on money. So when I say I love money, I'm not saying, I wonder how much money is in my bank. I'm not talking about that. I love talking about policy, M1, M2 money supply lines. I love talking about fiscal policy. I love talking about different types of government policies around money, because I can kind of sit there and go, well, what about this? I love getting this. We watch sports. I get into the general manager side of things and not to the sports side, but how do you wear salary cap? How do you do this? How do you keep this player? How do you trade that? I love the analytical side of things. So I went there and I tell everybody that I learned what not to do.
Mm-hmm.
Spent years working there and I learned what not to do. Before, and I wasn't even planning on coming back, but I was so disenfranchised with the not even just the company, but the industry I was in. I was so disenfranchised with it that, but I was still, I wanted to make a career out of it. So I was going to move back. I'd been gone for 6 years. My mom had called me on the phone and said, you've been gone for 6 years. You're working crazy hours. You need to settle down.
Yeah.
There was some other stuff going on. She was pretty upset about some stuff that was happening personally within the family. And so when your mom comes crying on the phone, you drop everything and go running. So I dropped everything and went running for mom. Hi, mom, I love you. So dropped everything and went running. Now, fast forward, it did make me a better employee because you put everybody else first. But I literally worked in the mailroom. There's, in the business that I have, I've just like you, I've worked in every single department. So I know how they all work and what they need. Can I do it better than everybody else? Of course not. But I know enough about the department to know what decisions are stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And which
I just wonder if some of these inept people that you ran into, like what was their background and foundation? Did they just come straight out of college and know somebody's dad who put them in a position and they never had to pay their dues? I wonder if paying your dues gets you out of the Ivory Tower. So I wonder, those people in the Ivory Tower, where did they come from?
Paying your dues 100% gets you out of the Ivory Tower. It 100% gets you to see this. So it's an interesting question. When you take a look at some of those people that came in, I'll never forget, I had one director, and he just wouldn't stop about his university. And it wasn't that good of a college. It wasn't like a premier. It was one of these ones where you're like, okay, you don't say anything, you don't judge, like whatever. He had never, two things happened. Either they've never worked in the trenches, or they worked the trenches so long ago, and when they moved out, they just completely disconnected from it in such a way where they just don't want to know, where they forgot what it was like to work the trenches. We were in the middle of a busy day, just a heavy, heavy day. It was a stressful day. At the time, when I was doing this, our server was one of the busiest servers in the world. IBM was building us a server. They were inventing the server for us. We were getting 1 billion hits a day on our website. And our fab was a 5-story building. And so the mainframe that IBM was building, they were literally developing it on the fly. So the system kept crashing and then coming back up and crashing, coming back up. Okay. He was surfing ESPN. This is before you had smartphones, right? So he's in a glass office, so it's like a cube. You could see what he's doing, and you'd think that if you're living in a glass cube like that, you'd be more self-aware of the fact that, God, just pretend to do something. He was surfing ESPN at the busiest part of the day. He was relieved to be out of the trenches. So 2 things happen. Either you never see the trenches, or you are so far removed because you did it so long ago, and when you leave, you're like, oh, thank goodness it's over. I don't have to do that anymore. That shouldn't be the case. You should be proud of that. And I think that's what's missing. And it's not just corporate America. It's on the government side too, right? Take a look at some of I'll take Egypt, for example, okay? Egypt's gone full circle from the Arab Spring, right? In terms of where President Mubarak was, now you have President al-Sisi. The one thing Egypt never lost sight of, and you can criticize their government for many things, whatnot, but the one thing they didn't lose sight of is that the leader of the country must have served in the military. I'm not saying that's what the U.S. needs to have. I'm not making this a political debate. But he has to have served, not because it's written by law, but because the military is part of the Constitution, and because you have to be able to have that because of who your neighbors are. Right? That's an example. When you get to, let's talk about the U.S. I'm not talking about the presidency, but I'm talking about the Treasury Department. I'm talking about the head of the Federal Reserve. If the people don't actually understand fiscal policy, I spent a couple of years teaching stockbrokers how to read money supply lines, right? How to know what interest rates are going to do based on what the M1, M2 lines were going to do in terms of money supply lines, how it was moving, what it was doing, just to be able to teach them that part. So it wasn't just relying on whatever is being told to them by their analysts about this stock or this fund or that fund. Being able to actually understand what the economy is actually doing. During the pandemic, I sat down and we were teaching classes showing, different Bollinger. You remember these classes?
I do. It was fun.
We were teaching people on industry how to take the noise out of the economy and just take a look at the price of oil, the price of the dollar. And we were talking about their asset bubbles, different places, what to watch for to make sure they kept, they kept stable businesses. Really, it's every bit of it, right? So we're teaching these stockbrokers about M1, M2 money supply lines. If somebody is running the Federal Reserve, it's there. Case in point, right? When you look at the last series of elections, we get so caught up in political parties and political affiliations and what somebody should do. Did I freeze up again? Jeez Louise, what is going on? So we get so caught up with party affiliations. We get so caught up with who's saying what and what they believe. We don't ever talk about this, about the Treasury Secretary or the Federal Reserve. And it goes back to this point that if you're going to talk about all the elements of, just the elements of what somebody believes, then you should understand what they're talking about, where they come from. I have an idea. I'll close with this idea. And we're gonna save part 2 because we're gonna do a second part of this, and we're gonna talk about the new Pope, which is exciting.
Yeah.
Again, we're not going to, but watch. When we talk about this, watch how quickly it gets political. Watch how quickly people's agenda will take over when the recording comes out, even though it has nothing to do with that, right? It's going to be from the standpoint of a Peruvian who is so proud. Forget about the religious aspect. He was in her hometown. Right? Yes, he's from Chicago. He's from the U.S. And we get so caught up. Oh, he's an American. He was in Peru. And he was there.
Right.
And that's huge. And I think there's a part of it that so we'll talk about that in the next episode. But I want to close with this idea. I want you to imagine having a debate. And instead of telling your presidential candidate to pick a vice president, tell them they got to pick their Secretary of State, the Secretary of Treasury, and the Chief of Staff. And the Secretary of Defense, those 4 people. right? They got to pick them ahead of time. Now you have your debate, and you have them standing in the front, and you as the candidate sitting in the back. Now the question gets asked, and the moderators to the president to say, how would you deal with, let's say, this conflict in XYZ part of the world, right? Again, blinders, taking the ivory tower blinders off, right? How would you get in? Well, I'm going to have, can you please have your Secretary of Defense allay your position? Can you please have your Secretary of State allay your position in terms of what this is? You're going to find out in about 35 seconds how well the communication is. Now, there's a second part of this as well, right? Not just that, the interns. The lowest level intern that you can find in that presidential building, be it the White House, Parliament, or whatever the case, they should be in the debate. Should the conversation carry down, right? I'm not talking about the head of the party or a staffer. I'm talking about an intern that's 21 years old, that's 19 years old, 24 years old, that is working in that building. Does that person understand? Then having somebody from the audience randomly picked stand up and say, can you please summarize that position for me? And have them be able to say, this is a good idea or bad idea. And based on people can't help but to applaud or boo. You start getting some level of transparency in ideas. It's not about just sitting there and yes, we say we're making decisions for this, but what it prevents from happening is 10% of the population making decisions for the 100%. Yes, they're elected officials. I'm not questioning that. But we should have safeguards in place, the same way we have safeguards in place that prevent the stock market from completely collapsing, the same way we have safeguards in place and controls in place within our branches of government to make sure that there is some sort of checks and balances. Whether it's effective or not is a different thing altogether, right? A different story. There should be some level of that in those debates, some level of that where you are talking to the people of consequence, the people in positions, and not just here, worldwide, right? Absolutely worldwide in terms of it. So it's all levels. I think we talked about earlier about the IMF and having an independent oversight board. When the new president of the World Bank and the IMF is put forth to be nominated and put in place, there should be a similar process, a debate where there is two people who want the position, a debate where you have the staffers, the interns, the people making decisions as part of that debate. It could just be two questions instead of 20. But my gosh, in those two questions, what kind of insight would you get?
Yeah.
It sure beats that versus having the office space staffer walking around the place going, so what's happening?
So my more lighthearted thought about this as you were telling me all this, did you follow the NCAA finals this year?
Of course I did. I had Arizona as my Cinderella before they lost to Duke. And considering my son is going to Florida, when they won, he was committed before they won. He's like, it counts. I committed. It counts. It counts. I committed. As if he had to do with the game.
Well, I didn't follow it closely, but I was charmed by and really felt like I knew everything I needed to know about McNeese based on their hype man. Did you hear about him, Amir Ora Khan? So he is their team manager and the hype guy. And, so think about this whole bottom, leading from the bottom up and, how instrumental he was in their success. And I loved everything about him. And so I think about that when you're talking about, understanding what's happening at the lower levels of a business or a government and like really dialing into that gives you a good indication of what's going on up above.
100%. I did. This just happened this past weekend. Gregg Popovich, who's one of the greatest NBA coaches to ever live, he had a stroke. He is having to force to retire from the NBA as a coach. His body can't take it anymore.
That's sad.
He was at his press conference and he could barely walk. He's being helped up onto the stage and talking and whatnot. And this is a guy that when you talk to him, he was famous for his interviews he would just basically stop and go, what kind of stupid question is that? He would basically just call somebody out for asking questions, and he would always stand out for the little guy. He would always stand up for the little guy. Do you know who was in the audience when he gave his farewell press conference? All the little guys. Not just the NBA players, past and present. All the little guys who he stood up for, that basically went and just talked to him. Every single other coach that was giving a press conference stopped and addressed him and thanked him for what they taught, for what he taught them, for what the legacy he left them, for what the way he set the bar. That's leadership. He never sat in an ivory tower. No wonder he has so many championships. No wonder he has that. He was always leading from the bottom up. He knew what every single person, from the towel guy up to a star player, what they're doing and what their potential was, because he got a chance. He got to know them. That's what leadership is. That's what real leadership is. And we can't just sit in the ivory tower and expect to make those things. Otherwise, we are the Lumbergs from Office Space walking around going, yeah, I'm going to need you to come in on Sunday. I think we should take every single person in Ivory Tower and give them all red staplers and go, here. Those of you who don't know what it means, watch Office Space. Watch the movie. You'll see what the red stapler is about.
I'm going to have to watch it.
Just don't burn it.
It's a rainy day. It seems like a good thing to do.
Just don't burn anything down. You'll see what I mean when you watch it. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you for that. And remember, what we talked about in this podcast, right? Lead from the bottom up. Don't get out of the ivory tower. If you find yourself out of touch, go ask questions. And you know what? If you're not sure, just ask the person next to you, am I a jerk? If the answer is yes, you're out of touch. If the answer is no, you're doing something right.
Yeah. I like it.
All right. Take care. Bye, everybody.
To be continued.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Sustainable Voice. If you have a success story of your own, please reach out and share it with us. We'd love to hear from you. See you next time.